Language Foundations Vocabulary Flashcards, helping you achieve understanding.
The branch of biology that studies heredity and variation in organisms. The branch of biology that studies heredity and variation in organisms. The science that studies living organisms. The science that studies living organisms. All the plant and animal life of a particular region. Characteristic life processes and phenomena of living organisms. The biology of viruses. The branch of genetics concerned with the structure and activity of genetic material at the molecular level. The branch of biology that studies the cellular aspects of heredity, especially the chromosomes. The branch of genetics that studies the full set of proteins encoded by a genome. The branch of genetics that studies the genetically determined variations in responses to drugs in humans or laboratory organisms. The branch of genetics that studies organisms in terms of their genomes, their full DNA sequences. Having a valence of 1. Used of a chromosome that is not paired or united with its homologous chromosome during synapsis. A univalent chromosome. Genetics. Either of a pair, or series, of alternative forms of a gene that can occupy the same locus on a particular chromosome and that control the same character. Genetics. An organism or cell having a diploid set of chromosomes from each parent. Having many values, meanings, or appeals. Subtle, multivalent allegory. Having more than one valence, or having a valence of 3 or higher. Used of the association of 3 or more homologous chromosomes during the first division of meiosis. Relating to or characteristic of or befitting a parent. Parental guidance. Designating the generation of organisms from which hybrid offspring are produced. Of or relating to an inheritable character that is controlled by several genes at once. Of or related to or determined by polygenes. Genetics. An organism or cell having more than twice the haploid number of chromosomes. Of a cell or organism having more than twice the haploid number of chromosomes. A polyploid cell. An allele that produces its characteristic phenotype only when its paired allele is identical. Of or pertaining to a recession. Of genes, producing its characteristic phenotype only when its allele is identical. Of a cell or organism having 3 complete sets of chromosomes. Human triploid fetuses are usually spontaneously aborted. Genetics. Either of a pair, or series, of alternative forms of a gene that can occupy the same locus on a particular chromosome and that control the same character. Some alleles are dominant over others. A radio wave that can be modulated in order to transmit a signal. Medicine. A person, or animal, who has some pathogen to which he is immune but who can pass it on to others. Someone whose employment involves carrying something. The bonds were transmitted by carrier. A large warship that carries planes and has a long flat deck for takeoffs and landings. A man who delivers the mail. A boy who delivers newspapers. A person or firm in the business of transporting people or goods or messages. An inactive substance that is a vehicle for a radioactive tracer of the same substance and that assists in its recovery after some chemical reaction. A rack attached to a vehicle, for carrying luggage or skis or the like. A self-propelled wheeled vehicle designed specifically to carry something. Refrigerated carriers have revolutionized the grocery business. Genetics. An organism that possesses a recessive gene whose effect is masked by a dominant allele. The associated trait is not apparent but can be passed on to offspring. A formal recommendation by a former employer to a potential future employer describing the person's qualifications and dependability. Requests for character references are all too often answered evasively. A person of a specified kind, usually with many eccentricities. A real character. The inherent complex of attributes that determines a person's moral and ethical actions and reactions. Education has for its object the formation of character. An imaginary person represented in a work of fiction, play or film or story. She is the main character in the novel. A written symbol that is used to represent speech. The Greek alphabet has 24 characters. A characteristic property that defines the apparent individual nature of something. The radical character of our demands. An actor's portrayal of someone in a play. Engrave or inscribe characters on. Genetics. An attribute, structural or functional, that is determined by a gene or group of genes. Good repute. He is a man of character. Genetics. Any event that changes genetic structure. Any alteration in the inherited nucleic acid sequence of the genotype of an organism. Genetics. The process of locating genes on a chromosome. Genetics. A segment of DNA that is involved in producing a polypeptide chain. It can include regions preceding and following the coding DNA as well as introns between the exons. It is considered a unit of heredity. Genetics. A large vector that is made from a bacteriophage and used to clone genes or gene fragments. Meet at a point. To cover or extend over an area or time period. Extending or lying across, in a crosswise direction, at right angles to the long axis. Cross members should be all steel. Travel across or pass over. Annoyed and irritable. Any affliction that causes great suffering. That is his cross to bear. A marking that consists of lines that cross each other. Genetics. The act of mixing different species or varieties of animals or plants and thus to produce hybrids. Hinder or prevent, the efforts, plans, or desires, of. Genetics. An organism that is the offspring of genetically dissimilar parents or stock. Especially offspring produced by breeding plants or animals of different varieties or breeds or species. A mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey. Breed animals or plants using parents of different races and varieties. Cross a horse and a donkey. A representation of the structure on which Jesus was crucified, used as an emblem of Christianity or in heraldry. A wooden structure consisting of an upright post with a transverse piece. Fold so as to resemble a cross. She crossed her legs. Meet and pass. The trains crossed. Trace a line through or across. Cross your T. Genetics. An organism that is the offspring of genetically dissimilar parents or stock. Especially offspring produced by breeding plants or animals of different varieties or breeds or species. Breed animals or plants using parents of different races and varieties. Mendel tried crossbreeding. Reproduction by parents of different races, especially by white and non-white persons. Genetics. the act of mixing different species or varieties of animals or plants and thus to produce hybrids. A path, often marked, where something, as a street or railroad, can be crossed to get from one side to the other. A junction where one street or road crosses another. Genetics, the act of mixing different species or varieties of animals or plants and thus to produce hybrids. A shallow area in a stream that can be forded. A point where two lines, paths or arcs etc., intersect. A voyage across a body of water, usually across the Atlantic Ocean. Traveling across. The omission that is made when an editorial change shortens a written passage. An editor's deletions frequently upset young authors. Any process whereby sounds or words are left out of spoken words or phrases. Genetics, the loss or absence of one or more nucleotides from a chromosome. The act of deleting something written or printed. Genetics, an organism or cell having the normal amount of DNA per cell, i.e., 2 sets of chromosomes or twice the haploid number. Of a cell or organism having 2 sets of chromosomes or twice the haploid number. Diploid somatic cells.
Become our student and get access to effective and free educational materials. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to become a part of our growing YouTube community and to learn English effectively.